We have tried to distill this experience in a practical guide for researchers that it's has been built with the opinions, experiences, doubts, and input from many people in the project and outside the project. And it's a guide that has been open reviewed, and it's openly available, and you can find it in our Greco project webpage. But we also wanted to enrich our experience and put it into dialogue with other outstanding experiences that have gone in the open science and responsible research and innovation fields, from speech to practice. And that is the reason why we're here, that we want to get this opportunity, well, as much as an online webinar allows, to show and debate how we can adopt open science in research projects. Well, there is first an opening session with 2 appealing presentations that will put the framework to the webinar. And then, as Mario said, you have to share and choose one of the sessions, 3 parallel sessions. It's true that you may be interested in more than one topic, but the idea was to form smaller groups so that it is, well, there is some room for interaction and debate. But note, as Mario says, that the sessions will be recorded so that they will be afterwards available, so that if you're interested in the other sessions, you can also watch them, okay? After these parallel sessions, we will meet again at 11:50, and there will be 2 other very nice and important talks on the key role of young researchers and on the incentives and metrics. So that's also very important topics. And with no more introduction, we can then begin with the opening session with the participation of Dr. Rene Von Schomberg, a philosopher, a science and technology studies specialist, currently guest professor at the Technical University of Darmstadt. He holds a PhD from the University of Twente and a PhD from the University of Goethe University in Frankfurt on philosophy. He has been with the European Commission since 1998, where he's now leading a team on open science. He has edited and authored more than 10 books. Most recent co-edited book publication is the International Handbook on Responsible Innovation. So I think that he can be the perfect person to put the framework to our session today. So Rene, well, the floor or the screen is yours.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. You know, before I start sharing the screen, it's actually a pleasure to be with you, because I remember I had been drafting the call to which you successfully applied, and you were actually the first call where open science and RRI was combined, and I think it stayed also for quite some time the first and only call in this integrated way, which of course at that time I already was thinking, well, open science, as I will do now in my presentation, should be a necessary condition of RRI, although not a sufficient one. I think in the end one should keep in mind that responsible innovation requires an institutional change, and this is where I'm currently working on, both in private and in function of what I do in the Commission concerning especially open science. So I will especially address the latest things on this at this front. I believe that responsible innovation in the long run is all about establishing public goods, preferably at the planetary level. You know, for example, the COVID-19 vaccine should have been a planetary good. It's now most likely only to be a national public good from the richer countries, but maybe we'll get there. So let me start off with a diagnosis why we do actually open science and RRI. I think there are at the moment two big crises in science. One is leads up to a more bigger crisis, and I think this one is sometimes dubbed the reproducibility crisis. It's just illustrated with one or two facts here. That the journal Nature had a long survey with a lot of scientists, and they reported that 70% actually cannot reproduce the data of colleagues. And in fact, the journal, which of course has to have high quality publications, I think only 60% of those good publications have data underlying it which are not reproducible. So we face a crisis here, and this is also shown especially in the biomedical field and in the clinical trials. You see that most trials actually fail. Now this is associated with another crisis which is bigger and more and also more relevant for the topic of RRI. Although the first one is of course relevant, especially for open science, and that is that we seem to invest ever and ever more in research and innovation with the hope on increasing relevant outputs, but in fact we succeed ever less in it. You know, so this is one other illustration that actually already since the 1950s the output is actually halved in terms of successful products. And I think just another illustration, in the last 20 years, I think only 1 or 2 antibiotics have seen the light, although we have a desperate need for those. So we have, there is a diagnosis which I think is here related with open science, that the science is ever more funded than ever, but it doesn't produce the right results. And that has to do with, I think, with two categories. It's either science is to become too competitive and too closed. And because it is too closed, data are not successfully verified by colleagues across the field. And then the reproducibility issue, for example, in clinical trials, comes at the end of the story. Secondly, it has become so competitive in terms of publishing and parsing paradigm that we publish not necessarily relevant science. We publish things which are sexy for the editors of high impact journals, which leads science not to the directions of societal demands. And this is why we want to foster open science, which simply is, as I defined it, sharing knowledge and data as early as possible in the process in open collaboration with all relevant knowledge actors. So it has actually 2 elements, open science. Openness in terms of openness to knowledge sources, such as publications, data, software, or what you have, but also openness to collaboration both in terms within science and beyond science. And this is, of course, also have been the rationale of your project. Now, the question is actually, we have now, for the first time in the light of COVID, seen that we have incentivized open science globally, of course, with a view that we would never have had the vaccine if we would have done as business as usual. The normal science and industrial world would not have produced such a vaccine in 1 year time, or less than a 1 year time, if we would not have incentivized open science. Yet the whole situation is still suboptimal in terms of implementation of open science, because open science refers to all aspects of the scientific research circle. So it starts already off with scientific discovery. I think you addressed it also in your project with open electronic notebooks, for example. It extends to review and assessment and of course knowledge dissemination. But most importantly, it's about creating a joint open research agenda with all relevant knowledge actors to define the research agendas and of course anticipate the type of outputs we would like to see. Now, we have only, I think, successfully implemented open science in emerging health issues such as Ebola and Zika and now COVID. My issue is actually why not apply to all sustainable development goals, like of course you now also did in your project. It's something which is about establishing public goods and making science more responsive to societal demands. Now, I think in order to get there, we really need to change our rewards and incentive system, and this is where we work on at the Commission level, of course. If I just summarize this very, very typically, so to speak, when we practice close science, and this is in the most cases, is that we try actually to establish individual prestige. We actually also pretend as if science is an individual activity rather than a collective activity, which is actually, of course, contrary to the nature of science. It has a focus and motivation on scientific frontiers, new and sexy results, in order to get it published. For example, only 7% of the submissions to Nature are successful, which means that 93% has to wait and try to get it published elsewhere. So you have enormous delays in dissemination of scientific information. Citations, they are supposed to go well if you publish in Science, but it's because of the long delay, it's actually less successful than if you would have published in open access or instantly done this. Now, some are afraid that in terms of mobility, if you would practice open science, then you would be blocked to move, for example, to prestigious institutions. Now, practicing open science has another rationale. It's not an individual prestige matter, but it's establishing a network and a community to collaborate on a commitment, with a commitment on a particular output. Now, this rationale has a focus. I think it should have a focus of driving research and innovations towards societal desirable outputs, but we have to have mechanisms for that. I think up till now, Horizon, the previous program of the European Union, Horizon 2020, did not have yet clear mechanisms. We have them now in Horizon Europe, among others, with mission-oriented research elements. I come back to that later. Now, so you will see that if you practice open science, you actually also will get higher citations rate, although this is of course not the primary objective to do open science. So you will also see that open science is of course not only in something which institutionally has to be incentivized, but it's also something which is happening bottom up. Scientists are also frustrated with the publishing focus and would like to have their research to have societal impact. And in some cases, of course, open science has been practiced in the past, for example, the Human Genome Project, and it is, of course, characterized by international transdisciplinary and, of course, in an open dimension, very often, as in this case, publishing was put on a moratorium. It's about sharing knowledge and data as early as possible. This is the nucleus of open science. Now, so we see that the current system actually rewards individual prestige, actually sets up scientists to compete with each other. Excellence is, as you know, a sort of self-referential criterion. It's that scientists who decide about science, but nobody actually knows what excellence is, or what quality actually means here. It's undefined, and it's based on case-for-case assessments in relatively closed peer review settings. Now, this all leads researchers to be incentivized to publish as much as possible, and it's even more reinforced by a research assessment system which quantifies this in terms of number of citations or number of publications. We use these as a proxy for quality and productivity, although they have actually very little to do with it. Now, this is a very bad situation in science. As you see, I'm quite negative in terms of its diagnosis. And so if we want to engage on open research and scholarship, as you do in your project, then it's about rewarding collaboration in terms of a purpose of a scientific project. It's about collaboration, and if you don't do it, you won't have social desirable impacts anyway. It's a precondition to achieve those. So what does it mean in terms of institutional adjustments? Well, it means that we actually have to change completely how we fund and reward scientists to do their work. We have to shift from rewarding outputs, so rewarding, for example, publications, to rewarding research behavior. And this is something else. So you enter the operation of the scientific world and you start rewarding how scientists behave in their research behavior in terms of whether they collaborate, whether they establish transdisciplinary networks, etc. So it's about rewarding research behavior. So it's a complete shift of the system which is required. I think we will start working on that, or we have started working that only in the Commission already with stakeholders since 2016 with Open Science Policy Platform. This has progressed rather slowly. It has now become a new impetus because of COVID-19, of course. Everybody now sees that open science is a necessity, and we hope this will lead to faster translation by member states to change the reward system, because of course this is not a Commission business as such, but a business of member states and of course the autonomy of universities. Now, my second part of my talk is very short. This is the bridge to RRI. As you see, with open science, you have already quite a lot of key elements of RRI. You have the element of open collaboration. You have the element of co-creation. You have the especially, of course, the elements how you actually conduct your scientific exercise. But then still we have a problem with addressing what, of course, everybody knows is a market failure, that research does not produce the type of products society is waiting for, or which would be so social desirable from a policy perspective. So it's about giving innovation also a direction, and when possible, creating also defining its characteristics. So we have to find mechanisms in order to establish that, and also for this we need institutional change. This goes beyond, of course, just the funding system, as we discussed in open science. This also touches upon the public management of our economy. Now, this has a lot of implications. I can only give some keywords. We have to work with notably non-legislative actions, as we probably will also do now in the Green Deal, which is actually a good example of a social commitment with knowledge actors across society to put innovators across the table to drive innovations towards social desirable ends. We have to address the IPR issue, which is too strict when it enters already in the discovery phase. Otherwise, of course, we won't get the outputs which we like. This is then a short my overview. We have at the theoretical level of responsible innovation, it's all about institutionalization of co-responsibility. That means that we have not only as public actor, for example, the Commission or other public authorities, to assign responsibilities to actors, but also allow them to become responsible. So that includes also citizens. This you will see now at Horizon Europe. A substantial budget will be on including citizens and societal actors in the co-creation and design of research agendas in terms of mission-oriented research, which is of course all about driving innovations towards those social desirable ends. I can of course talk very long about this, but I think I leave it here with some keywords. You have been working very successful on a project actually illustrating quite a lot of elements which I now addressed. I cannot do otherwise and also still advertise our book, which features 60 authors actually who worked on responsible innovation. It covers virtually all areas and different continents of the earth. If you want to download free documents on responsible innovation and open science, then you can consult also my website. I will share a link in the chat. And well, I look forward to the discussion, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Rene. And well, we will leave the discussion for the parallel sessions and for the conclusion session. Just to move on, we have a tight schedule, but you put the perfect framework explaining not only the interest but also the urgency and of open science and responsible research and innovation if we want that research really answers to the demands and concerns of society. And I think that the second talk of this opening session is a good complement because it will well, show examples on how to do it in practice, and it will be given by Ana Belén Cristóbal. She's doctor in chemistry by the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid and master in technological valorization. Since 2007, she has been responsible for the project management at the Solar Energy Institute in Universidad Politécnica de Madrid, and supporting in the coordination, participation of a lot of European projects. And she's also the heart and the scientific coordinator of the Greco Project. So Ana,
okay,
the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Well, good morning, everyone. Some years ago, we started to think of integrating open science practices, but at that time, our researchers wrote the key question, the same question that probably our audience is wondering today. How can I integrate open science practices in my projects? During Greco, we have learned how to adopt and integrate open science practices, and therefore my talk is focused on showing you how we plan and integrate these practices in a real project. I'll begin by reviewing the concept of open science. Next, I will introduce the rationale with a practical case, and I will finish by giving you some recommendations. Well, maybe the better approach to the essence of open science can be found in the Open Innovation, Open Science, Open to the World report presented by the European Commission in 2016. There, they consider that the scientific openness must be addressed to get a more reproducible, transparent, reliable, and accessible science by sharing openly research outputs as soon as possible. In practice, this means that you have more than 400 tools that may help you to such mission. But the institutional vision of Europe in this report also stresses that open science involves engaging with non-institutional participants, in other words, the general public. The underlying reason is to achieve a better alignment of scientific outputs with the end user's expectations at the time that science benefits from knowledge democratization. In practice, public engagement can be performed at different levels, as shown by Luisa Barbosa in the ladder of science communication. Then, once we know what open science means, let's move to the core of my talk, how to integrate open science methodologies in my project. The first thing you must always remind is that open science is not the goal, okay? You don't have to achieve a rate of open science practices or establish that your goal in the project is, an example, to publish in open access, because open science is not the goal, it's the means to fully exploit the research outputs of your project and maximize its impact. Consequently, there is not a general recipe to follow, but a full spectrum of different strategies to be open in each project. Of course, everybody knows that there are mandatory issues related to open science, such open access, your journal articles, and the archive of data supporting the article discussion. But you are not going to win an Horizon Europe project working open science as in FP7, okay? So it is needed to apply a rationale for applying and using open science in a project. So let me show you how we did it. Well, the first step of our rationale is to identify what type of research output you are going to generate with your project. As you can see, there are many different types of research outputs. Here, I usually highlight that a conference or a journal article or a book or similar is not a research output, okay? It's a consequence of having a research output that you have to disseminate. This is why you don't see articles or proceedings in the image. For practical purposes, let's visualize a typical project in any research domain, it doesn't matter, where you have to provide a prototype. Typically, this can generate at least 4 key research outputs: a review on the state of the art, some predictive models, usually these are simulations on the properties or the expected behavior of the new system, the prototype itself, and the characterization or monitoring of the device. This is the typical research output that the majority of projects can have. Well, after having cleared your first research output, the second point is going under the tip of the iceberg. This means think ahead about your research outputs you are generating. Maybe this is the most difficult part, since the majority of researchers have been trained to think about the 4 or 5 main themes of their projects. But open science, in the majority of the cases, is about the rest of the iceberg. Is where you can maximize the impact of the project. Then, in our practical case, if you are getting new simulations, probably you have implemented a new code or algorithms in your software. Therefore, these are also a research output. Moreover, if you are fabricating a new prototype, there will be a know-how or improved skills you have acquired. And also, if you are a good researcher, you will also have a large collection of cumulative failures during your discovery project. All of them, of course, are also research outputs. And for monitoring the new device, perhaps you have had to modify an experimental setup if a new one is not mounted, and it is possible that a new protocol for measuring has been developed. So if you think ahead the tip of the iceberg, you will find a lot of research outputs. The third point is to include research outputs related to others' needs. Probably you have planned some task or activity related to mobilization of the quadruple helix of knowledge in your projects, but if you are not used to deal with these actions, I invite you to attend parallel session number 1 after my talk in order to know how to run such networks in an effective way. This type of activities or tasks usually generate other types of research outputs, like roadmaps, educational material, policy recommendation, and so on. So let's imagine we have a task in our project to organize several meetings with different stakeholders, and the result of such activities are roadmaps towards the societal integration of the new solution. Okay, this is the number 10. So in conclusion, you can see how in a very quick exercise, we have identified 10 research outputs, but when you are really training on thinking and tracking your activity, a typical project with 5 or 6 key research outputs is capable to identify up to 80, as we have done in Greco. Next step consists in identifying potential users and uses of such research outputs and decide how to exploit or disseminate such results, and then decide the type of action that you are going to take to maximize its impact. To make myself maximally clear, let's go through each of the research outputs we have previously identified. In the case of the bibliographic analysis, such review can be disseminated through a review paper in a scientific journal. The most obvious way of implementing the open science in that case will be to make open access such paper through a green or gold way, but beyond of that, you can start the openness at the moment of writing the paper or preparing the study using collaborative writing or shared reference libraries. Yes, if you are thinking now on that, I can confirm that openness, although it's intended to achieve the whole world, sometimes it's so simple as being open in your own network, in your own team, okay? In addition, you could archive the preprint in any repository prior sending the paper to the selected journal. On the other hand, such review, if it had generated a database, in example, because your review was intended to extract data, that's data mining, could generate the basis of a crowdsourcing database in your own community, where others could expand in the work or even curate the existing data. A good example on this will be shown in the parallel session 2 today. The second output is a code. Of course, you could have the code in your own computer, but by uploading the code in GitHub, you will be facilitating both the reuse and the review of such code. In the third case, we have selected the output to be presented in an international conference. Well, you can go to the conference and give your talk there, but a good way to increase the impact of your work would be the preparation of a video abstract and you archive in a repository. This is so simple that you can do it with the tools included in PowerPoint and use your rehearsals previous to the conference to record such video. This is easier, of course, than annotate your PowerPoint for enabling its further reuse by third parties. Of course, you will have to decide what type of open license is going to be assigned to such work. And precisely here, I want to clarify that assigning open licenses is not a bureaucratic process. It's so simple as remarking the selected license in a visible part of your work. And sometimes people forgot this point, but it is crucial to be protected by the international law if somebody breaches the condition you license the reuse of your work. In this regard, today we also have among the speakers a lawyer, a specialist on this matter, Professor de la Cueva, who will be at the session 2. You could also share the conference proceeding in a selected repository, but in that case, please check this point with editors, since rules are not so clear, such as for the journal articles. The result number 4 and the result number 6 are going to be exploited under an industrial secret and a patent. This perfectly fits in your project, but you will have to define very well the actions that are going to ensure that such outputs are exploited, okay? And what about the failures? You can share your failures in specialized journals of negative results and apply the same open access practices commented for result number 1. Or you could write a report and upload it into a repository. If this is the case, I would recommend you to use repositories such as Zenodo that assign your work a DOI, a digital object identificator, so you can increase the citations of your work. Well, just in case you have developed a new setup for measuring, you can open your infrastructure by setting a tariff system and the condition for using such setup. In fact, there are a lot of organizations that have internal procedures to approve such technological services or access infrastructures by third parties. When thinking of a new protocol for measuring, there are several ways of openness. Maybe for the majority of researchers, it's a big step, just the idea of writing protocols for measuring to ensure that the reproducibility of measures among different generations of researchers. But I have to say that there are tools to write protocols and serve them beyond your own team. In example, sharing protocols is very useful when aiming at round-robin tests among partners in a consortium, or if you have had an extraordinary result in order to show the research community the set conditions you perform the test. Of course, you could also shoot video tutorials and make them public to show how a measure is done. This is also a protocol. I have to say that I love video tutorials, since sometimes a picture is worth more than 1,000 words. Result number 9 is perfect to test open notebooks. I'm not going too deep into this idea because Professor Martí will talk about this in parallel session number 3. But of course, you can facilitate its exploitation by third parties by making open data. In this regard, parallel session number 2 will help you to this open data approach. And finally, how to use open science actions to create a better roadmap. Well, firstly, we must ensure that the deliverable is going to be public through some repository, assigning a DOI and due open licenses. But you can use open peer review activity with experts on the area not belonging to your project in order to increase the quality of the document and at the end, the acceptability of your recommendations in your domain. So in summary, Greco uses open science to increase the impact of our research outputs, and this is planned through 4 steps. Identify your research outputs, deep into the research outputs, think what are you going to do with each of them, and take actions to ensure a broad use of the outputs, facilitate its reuse, and ensure its tracking while protecting your rights using open licenses. Just in case you have questions about open science, I recommend you to look at the guide we have edited in Greco. This guide is answering frequent questions from technical area researchers when thinking on applying open science in their research projects. And the guide has 3 versions, and the last one was generated after an international open peer review process with experts from many relevant organizations trying to help you with direct instructions. And just to finalize my talk, on the left, Nikola Tesla, betting for alternate current, and maybe one of the fathers of open science with his famous quotation, "I don't care that they stole my idea. I care that they don't have any of their own." On the right, Thomas Edison, the major defender of direct current, his famous quotation, "Everybody steals in commerce and in industry. I've stolen a lot myself, but I know how to steal. They don't know how to steal." It's probably one of the major reluctances that researchers have to make open science. So yes, go ahead with open science, but please remind, use open licenses. Make your outputs as open as possible and as close as necessary. And open science doesn't preclude your obligations to protect the results, the confidentiality obligation, the security obligations, or the obligations to protect personal data. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ana Belén. Thank you so much. And yeah, well, I think it's a perfect complement to the first session. So being so practical, I'm afraid, yeah, we don't have a lot of time now for the discussion. We were forced because of this online format to keep it short so that the whole event does not take so longer. We will have more time, and we want to respect that 20 minutes each in each of the sessions. Will be smaller groups, easier to debate, I hope. Before we move to the sessions, yes, I just want to get to this last point raised by Ana Belén, because it was also one of the things that appear in the questionnaires that you and the comments that you left, many of you in the registrations, and put it to Rene, if very short, about this fear of misusing my intellectual property if I publish, put everything open, and what could you, or what is the approach at how open science, responsible research and innovation approaches answer to these concerns that are raised by many of us researchers.